Good evening, everyone. We welcome to like the next webinar in the series of webinar. This one is all about domain ontology, as we have talked about. And while we go through the motions, I think first things first, we have with us Dr. Kavita. She was gracious enough to come on board as a speaker. She comes with pretty much decades of experience when it comes to pharma R&D, and she has pretty much seen the entire life cycle, right from how preclinical trials are done to real-world evidence collection to being able to figure out what are the outcomes that a particular, let's say, a molecule or an approach would actually result in when it comes to the real world. She has pretty much tons of stories when it comes to not only on the process side of things, but also how different geographies interact with pharma as a domain. And yeah, I think we'll have a not just a fun time, but also an enriching time as we continue to chat with her. Had the luck of having brief chats with her before the webinar, and pretty much with every conversation, I think I've come out with some insights that I hadn't quite thought of before. So thank you again, Kavita, for coming here. So much like most webinars, the way we'll structure this is we'll just begin with what the entire theme is about, give you a general overview of what it looks like from a product lens, what, let's say, DecisionX as a platform espouses for and how it puts it into practice. And then we'll spend the better part of the later half interacting with Dr. Kavita, learning from her real world experiences when it comes to all the domain experiences that she has gathered. I'm sure that for a lot of people who have joined in, this will be their sort of first introduction to the world of sort of real world evidence collection, how these trials are done, how evidence packages are looked at, what are the kind of um, let's say real world dynamics that exist out there. And for some of the participants, as I noticed in the list, I think this will be more of an extension of their day to day where they get more of an in-depth experience of this all. So yeah, with that said, let me just share my screen and just give a general introduction of what typically we mean by when we say domain ontology, keeping all the jargons aside, and how we think this plays a key role in being able to sort of integrate AI into the everyday lives of high stakes interactions, high stakes decision making, and real world implications. So just give me a second. I hope my screen is visible now that we are able to see the Zoom home screen. So let me just get to the deck first. So yeah, so just continuing from where we had left the last webinar as sort of like a cliffhanger, but more like an explanation. Enterprise decisions typically need three things: a unified context, a causality understanding, and a decision memory. Now, the reason these three things are of prime importance is because when you look at any typical enterprise workflow, the decision context in itself is fragmented. So there are multiple tools, things are taking multiple weeks to come at a single place. You are spending a lot of time trying to sort of piece through these information that exist out there. The the second, and I think the key aspect, is that the causality is hidden. So typically decisions are being made on a very limited causal sense. There is very limited understanding of if X changes, what will be the impact on Y. There is a lot of gut instincts that are being drawn on. And typically, when we look at the kind of data that people have to deal with, it's already messy to begin with. There are already so many hidden variables that you have to deal with. There are already so many things that are changing at a day to day basis that this understanding of causality is not being preserved, let's say, across platforms or even in your day to day tools. The third, and I think the most important thing, is that once decisions are taken, there is no single place where they're actually being recorded or preserved uh, to not just learn from them, but also set them as the base for, let's say, future workflows, future investigations. If there are certain chaining of decisions that needs to happen, none of that is happening today. And that is why we feel that a correct approach to all of this is none of the platforms that are mentioned here. So typically the alternatives that people resort to would either be just using a general AI model. So you will resort to a chat GPT and as hysteria goes, resonate a lot. You never quite know how many tokens are being used. There was this entire wave of token maxing that seems to have hit its high peak. And Yeah, so that typically doesn't serve the purpose. The second is there are these purpose built platforms that exist out there which have been built to report but not really to decide, because they end up creating their own silos. So while human dynamics have their own silos, something which I'm sure we'll spend a bit more time on in the later half of this webinar, tools, and instead of sort of simplifying them, end up making them even more complex. So that tends to happen. And then the third is, which some of the technical folks in the audience today would probably have a deeper understanding of, are typical RAG systems, which have been built to just retrieve or search, but not really to make high stakes or real world decisions. That typically leads us to the approach that we have today and the key aspect that we want to talk about today. Um, so, of course, from a technical aspect, for the uninitiated, what DecisionX does is it builds a unified context layer from all of your structured and unstructured data, allows you to model your business. So, when we say model your business, there are essentially three aspects or elements to it. There is a data angle where plumbing together data, normalizing it, standardizing it, making it talk to each other or understand each other. The second key aspect is domain ontology. So what we mean by domain ontology is industry and process understanding that you can give to an AI so that it can typically reason over it. What we typically mean by that is, when you look at any particular domain, there is decades of human judgment, human lived experiences that already reside in people's heads. Now, all of that can't be extracted magically, and we can't really expect the AI to not give generic answers unless there is some form of base modeling that the system starts having an understanding from. Only then we can actually get to the future where we have AI and humans working in tandem, working on not just creative aspects, but on moving the career forward, where typically work starts feeling like a new atomic unit that you're dealing with day to day, where you're figuring things out, solving things, and things start to feel a lot more meaningful. That's the future we envision. And to bring that to life is where the entire domain ontology aspect actually comes into the picture. The third aspect is the causal layer, which of course, much like most things, you have a whole that's greater than the sum of the parts, but these are typically the two parts that we are referring to. So when we say the causal layer, this is the part where, given all of this domain understanding, the AI can start reasoning on top, can start giving you certain suggestions. So let's say if tomorrow you are doing an RC or a forecasting, you typically want your AI to be able to give you certain options, perform those deeper analysis, and bring to you that these are typically the decision, let's say, objects that you should look at, and sort of bring your human expertise or judgment on top of it. So that is typically what it looks like from a platform perspective. Now, of course, we have certain real world use cases that we power. Uh, so typically, when it comes to pharma, there is R&D, manufacturing, and commercials that we focus a lot more on. Again, this just stems from the fact that these are pretty much the places where the cost of a wrong decision is high, ranging from real world implications of wrong evidences, wrong outcomes, regulatory callbacks that tend to happen, to very tactically that the data available itself is very complex, very exists in messy formats. You never quite know how to string them together. There is deep process and domain intelligence that is needed in industries of these kind. So these are typically the use cases that we have powered and continue to sort of bring more value to our customers. So yeah, so with this base set, I think I'll just dive right into the platform. So there is like one of those phrases where, without further ado, let's just get into the action aspect. But yeah, I mean, as we sort of get into it, I think I would really want Dr. Kavita to spend just a few minutes, I think, just giving a general lay of the land, real world experiences. And then, of course, as we get into the platform, I'll just walk everyone through what that whole domain ontology pretty much means. But over to you, Dr. Kavita. Would love our audience to know a bit more about you in depth, all the real world lived experiences that you've seen, and then probably we can get into the platform aspects as well.
Sure. So I would like to place myself as I'm a clinical doctor and I have been exposed to a lot of clinical data within controlled environments and in the real world. So what I have been doing through the years that I've been working in the healthcare domain is try to identify what the unmet need is, how do we fill that need, who needs the data, where do you get the data, and once you have it, how to make sure that data is usable, it's exchangeable, tradable, and then what kind of analysis, scientifically sound analysis, can you do on that data so that it has some meaningful insights for the decision makers? So it would span from, actual in-clinic experience with patients to going out there and doing the trials themselves with those patients and healthy volunteers, and then going on and analyzing that data or doing primary or secondary analysis on desktop. So, the whole span of how that data was generated and utilized for evidence generation, and then talking to the regulators and the people who make the reimbursement decisions, the payers, to understand what they need and what form they need, so that it makes the best impact on patient outcomes, positive impact on patient outcomes, and whether they are ready or their infrastructure is ready to support that kind of investment for improving the health of those patients. Because as in economics, everything is limited. There's limited amount of money that you can invest, and it's not just the opportunity cost of what the pharma companies or the consumer goods or medtech companies are producing. It's not just those interventions that we are talking about. Every state, government, private insurance company, everyone has a limited amount of funds, and they have to dissipate it in a manner that whoever is enrolled in those programs has a fair, what we call equitable distribution of resources, where they get access to healthcare. And I help generate evidence to ensure it is an equitable distribution, which is the majority receives the most high impact outcomes intervention, instead of a few receiving this fancy treatment and then it leaves the rest of them in the mud, not getting the basic treatment. So just understanding patients, understanding data, understanding evidence for decision making, that would be my career journey.
No, I mean, thanks a lot for bringing that out, Dr. Kavita. I think this is as real world as it gets, because there are, of course, the way I see it, to be honest, is there are two really key elements to it. One is, of course, the entire people dynamics, because now you have to figure out this is what truly the evidence should look like. How does that figure out into all the systems that exist out there? And the other and very important aspect that you need to figure out then, okay, this is where the money should go. This is where the real world value will accrue to the most people while keeping all of these constraints in mind. So thanks again for espousing it specifically for people who in our audience today who come more from a data AI background and really lack the real world knowledge that is being talked about. So thanks again. With this, let's just get into the platform. And I think one of the things that you mentioned, right, where there are always money decisions that have to be made under certain constraints. Maybe that can be one background with which let me just give an overview of the platform today. While it's not more on the R&D side, this particular demo, we'll probably focus more on the HCP intelligence side, just as part of the demo. But maybe as a secondary piece today, we can also go through certain field rep elements or pharmacovigilance, something of that sort. So yeah, we have a bunch of projects here. Let me just open, let's say, HCP intelligence to begin with. So yeah, even for the people who have attended all the previous webinars, and I can see a bunch of them, there'll be a few elements that will be new to you. So let me just begin from the beginning. So the first thing is, of course, when you come to DecisionX, say hello to the platform, you can actually see how data is plugged into the system. You can either upload your local files, which can be as messy as it can be. So it can be an Excel, CSV, PDF, whatever that be. You can plug in external apps. So these are all the usual suspects that you can have: your emails, project management apps, typical conversation apps, all of that. Your typical warehouses, BigQuery, Snowflake, if you are using AWS in that ecosystem. Now, as part of this project, I wanted to mimic real world systems to the largest extent. This is typically the work we have been engaging in with certain customers. So here you would see a wide variety of both internal, external data, structured and unstructured data. So just to give a general sense, first is transcripts. So these are typical rep call reports with all the sales activity. The second is external data, typical market data that comes in from IQVIA. Third is internal sales, where, of course, a more synthetic representation of monthly field sales performance. Fourth is HCP master, so about 300 physician accounts mapped to territories, hospitals, tiers. Fifth is HCP engagement score. So typically at an HCP level, what has engagement looked like? And last is account performance. So again, typical healthcare field activity engagement mapped to all of the different time periods. So you can typically see that we have textual data, which will of course be messy because it'll be transcripts in English, ranging from that to external data to internal, and a wide mix of it. So that brings us to ontology. Now, the first thing that the platform does as part of the ontology buildup is that there are ontology agents at the back that go through this data, figure out how to make it clean, bring it to a format such that it is not only understandable for the system, but also understandable for the human who is actually viewing this. So you can actually go to full preview, look at how the data has been transformed. What does the final shape and form of all the different fields that was there in the data look like today? This tends to happen across all the data files. Now, the second key aspect that comes as part of what we call connect is being able to add your own context. So this is the part where, of course, with the ontology agents at the back, there'll be parts that will be taken care of from the platform aspect itself. But as a person who holds the more sort of inherent nuances of an industry or a domain, this is the part where you can start bringing all of that in right from the start. So this can revolve either around the data aspects. So if there are certain metric definitions you want to bring in, there are certain product or entity taxonomy that you want to bring in, or just business rules that you want to put in, all of that can be imported here. From a domain perspective, we have something called ontology templates. Now, this is the part where the domain ontology aspect on DecisionX starts to come to the fore. So what we have here is a template library. Think of this as pretty much the best in class ontologies for different use cases that we handcrafted by talking to multiple experts in the field, by figuring out what does these workflows look like, and by having our sort of ontology agents be fine-tuned on them. Now, this is the portion where in case any team has any sort of ontology built out previously, be it in any format, for the data nerds out there, be it an RDF, OWL, if you are using a SQL ontology like a W3C, all of that can be brought in here and imported. And that becomes a part of the ontology templates that is applied as sort of the enriching context part. The second is the semantic layer, where again, if you have been using or accustomed to a very Power BI or a Tableau kind of a world, where you are accustomed to seeing dashboards, you can always just export the semantic layer and just import all of that in. From a decision angle, if there are certain process docs that already exist with you, you can always bring that in as well as part of the context and just drop it in here. So with all of the data plumbing, context plumbing done, we start getting into the meaty portions, which is build. Now, build is the place where from all angles, the ontology agents that are there in the platform start to figure out what are the ontology gaps that need to be surfaced. Now, in a world where we didn't exist, typically this is the part where data teams will have to start from zero. We have heard some people call this seeding intelligence into the platform, where they now want to give at least some domain understanding to the platform from zero, and you end up writing tons of TDLs, or if you're more on the real world and business end of things, you start preparing a lot of docs, you start preparing Excels with metrics. So instead of all of that, what the platform does is that it goes through all the data, starts figuring out relationships, and if there are certain clarifications or gaps that the system feels is important enough to be surfaced, this is the part that becomes where all of that gets shown to the human for a review. Now, typically, these are of the following kinds. It can either be a schema ambiguity, which is a very data sort of zone. The other is join safety, where if you want to relate one table to the other from a domain perspective, the system sort of surfaces that there are certain clarifications that you can give. Data aggregations. So if, let's say, things are in different grains, how to aggregate them. Integrity, completeness, typically on, let's say, there are some real world systems from which the data is coming through, if it is clean or not, or if there are certain issues that needs to be sifted through, or at a schema level, if there are certain ambiguities that exist. With every conflict, you get a summary of what this conflict is about. what is the evidence because of which the system feels this needs to be clarified, and then typically what the resolution options look like. So something that the system comes up with, and then of course you can go ahead and resolve it in a plain language. So this becomes the one place to always stay on top of what is the contextual understanding the system is gaining of your data, your domain, and your processes. Now, what the system does is pretty much the meaty or interesting portion, whatever we have talked about here, where it prepares the entire ontology graph. So let me just put it in 3D for that initial, what I like to call the wow effect, because now you can actually see to what extent the system has started to build relationships here, and you some I've heard some users call it the ontology planet. So what we have here are three layers to the ontology that has been built: data, domain, and decisions. Data again is just how your tables connect to each other. Domain is how your data objects map to the like particular business entities from an industry or a process level, and what does that relationship look like. Decision at the end of the day is to show how the concepts and metrics are derived, what they relate to, what they particularly drive or describe. So we can start getting a lot more deeper into what is the ontology that has been prepared here. So maybe I can just click on any one of these concepts that you actually see. Let's say, just click here. Now, this states that there is a primary address state that has been computed from HCP master. So if I just go to HCP master, now you start getting into what these relationships that have been derived look like. So on the right, you can actually see this is the description that the system has come up with. Again, this is something that you can always edit. Um, so here, what the system has understood from the data and the domain perspective is that there is a master reference table for HCPs and their account affiliations containing certain identifiers. What are the key columns that exist in this data? And then how is it actually connected to different entities, objects, as well as concepts? So you can actually start seeing what the depth of these relationship edges look like today. Instead of a typical references to, contains, all of that, what the system has started to figure out is from a causal lens, what are concepts that are computed from those particular objects. So let's say if I just clicked on a particular concept, you can see the metric that the system has sort of defined, uh, gives you a general sense of where it is coming from. And if you start going deeper into particular concepts, you can also see sort of multivariable relationships that the system is coming up with. So this becomes sort of the domain understanding that the system has come up with. Now, of course, this becomes a lot more complex to go through as a human. So you can always go to references and actually see that these are the derived metrics the system has come up with. What are the particular join logics from a data point of view, and the particular detected conventions that exist in the data already. So this becomes the ontology grounding for the system to actually start understanding your domain, reason it the way you would, and start to help you in one of those multi-layered reasoning that typically any person gets to see versus whatever generic can exist out there. So this is what we refer to as the three layers and how it all comes together. This is one of those domain ontologies coming together with decision ontology for HCP in pharma. I can probably just go on and show you how this then affects the kind of reasonings that you can then perform on the platform. So just going and taking one case, let's say forecasting. So let's say you just ask, give me a 12-week forecast of prescription volume by account. Now, the way the system has understood about this is something we can start seeing in the trail. This is sort of the intent understanding that the system took. So this is the part where we rely a lot on AI on trying to figure out what is it that the user wants. Now, of course, here the query was a little more simpler and straightforward. This is the part where the system then tells you what are the assumptions it took, what are the steps it took. So here you can actually see that there are four causal relationships that were ranked basis certain elements that were taken in. And then ultimately, what are the evidences it gathered and the final query that it executed. This is something that we had heard a lot of domain experts complain about, that typically AI used to be a black box. You never quite knew what was happening. So the trail became the one portion where you can then now actually see what the AI has understood, where what are the tables or elements that it is reasoning over, and then ultimately what is the query that it is coming up with. This then shows up in deep dive. And you can actually see, okay, these are, let's say, the forecast by accounts, the takeaways, what remains uncomputed. So I think one thing that we at DecisionX take a lot of pride on is the I don't know questions. So instead of the general confident sounding stupid answers that AI would typically give, we try to show a lot more of this is what the AI actually knew because it was grounded in your ontology. These are the parts that it doesn't quite know. And then there are certain clarifications that you can give for, let's say, the answers to continue to improve. So, so yeah, this was a general overview of what domain ontology on DecisionX today looks like and how it can power multi-layered reasoning like forecasting, RCA, or even optimization. Things that you will not quite find when you are referring to any other alternatives. So this pretty much the context set. If there are any questions, and I see some coming in, then we'd love to answer. Else, I think we'd like to spend a lot more time interacting with Dr. Kavita and learning from her real world experiences. Because at the end of the day, a platform is only as good as the domain expertise that it continues to learn from, and the human who tends to wield the platform at the end of the day. There was a certain joke that one of the participants had sent me on the email before this webinar, where there was this line quoted from the movie F1 that it's never the car, but it's always the driver. So yeah, with that context set in, let's actually go to Dr. Kavita. Actually, I see one question here. Uh, so yeah, so this asks that whenever there is a domain ontology built, how do you actually know what is the next thing to focus on? Yeah, so typically what tends to happen with the platform is that each time we are coming up, so there are actually like two key elements to it. One is, as you can see on the reasoning end, each time we are coming up with an answer, we also tend to point out, okay, this is things that would need certain clarifications, or these are things that weren't considered before. So that becomes one angle to look at, okay, this is what the data can come in. The other aspect is something called insights. Now, while this is more of a sample workspace, but typically, as you continue to reason on the platform, what we keep putting in together are ontology insights. So essentially, queries that reference certain parts of the ontology a lot more, or there is certain data caps that exist, and they become the next best action to sort of chisel the ontology further. So that again becomes a portion of the whole self-learning angle that we have on the platform today to empower domain experts. So yeah. So yeah, I think with that, hello again, Dr. Kavita. I think I hope the platform overview was pretty good to see. Do you have any first thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. Though I did not touch upon the commercial angle as much when I was briefing about myself, but definitely everything, all the evidence that you generate ultimately this is what it leads to. And to have an impact on patient outcomes, we need to convince the HCPs. Now a large part of it, what we call in market access, is also market acceptance, and market acceptance has two components. It has HCPs and it has patients. I'm sure you've shown just obviously the HCP part, but
Yeah.
it's all the way from the metrics, all of them that you have captured, and there are the other metrics which are the awareness and acceptance in the region for the local population and their beliefs and systems that they work with. So first look looks very amazing. Obviously you're capturing all the basics, the logic is sound, and then I would like to see more and just go on from there.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for that. And to be honest, I think one thing that I've really liked as we about our own platform, and there is something called builder's pride that you tend to have, is that as you continue to describe, right, there are always workflows that are very cross-functional, or there is an end-to-end aspect to it, like right from the way the data is gathered to how it is analyzed to what is the people's acceptance, gathering their feedback in, putting that into the final decisions. One of the builder's pride that we have is that as you continue to sort of build the ontology over, there is no sort of random silo that kicks in. So tomorrow, if let's say you start bringing in more of, let's say even patient interviews or trial results, all of that starts sort of enriching the ontology, and then this starts becoming one of your second brains, if you will. So yeah,
Absolutely.
thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, because what happens is you already have some of the terminology map. The ontology is already existing, it's in place. You refer to the outs and all. Also, what you have to then start doing is, obviously, if you start going back to the R&D part, then you do all the OMOPs and the CDISC standards, the LOINCs,
Yeah.
the SOMEDs. You go on to the PV parts. I'm obviously looking at, the FIRES data sets and everything they have to offer. You include more patient surveys, or from websites or apps that are collecting patient data, specific therapeutic apps, obviously. So it only enriches what you have, and as long as all the terminology is standardized and input, it just makes it more richer and more astute with its projections.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. Just as one of those plugs as part of the webinar, there is also something called the Ontology Wizard that you can just continue chatting over and giving more clarifications in. But with this, I think I'll put the platform to a little rest and would like to spend a lot more time just learning from your real world experiences, because there are people in the audience today who come from a lot of data AI background. I think there are a few of my acquaintances who have also joined in, who have recently started working in the pharma domain, and would love to learn from your experiences. So there were some questions that I had gathered from our team as well, from people who have been part of the webinar before and people who have joined in, and I had like a bunch of questions ready here. So I hope I can start shooting the questions through.
Yes, so let me know, you want me to talk faster or slower, because that would depend, how much I restrain myself or not, or I just power through it.
Uh, no, I mean, thanks for putting that out. So to be honest, I think just whatever brings the best insights in, whatever is the simplest for you. I'm sure our audience will catch up. And in case things are faster for them, we'll be happy to send recordings post the session as well. So we'll try our best so that people get acquainted with all the topics being talked about. So yeah, so with that, I think the first question that people had was literally that for someone typically outside of the field, especially the data AI nerds that we have here today, can you just take us through from, let's say, what a clinical trial looks like to a real world evidence to a high stakes decision that typically involves, let's say, certain end user value? What does it actually look like, and what typically changes at each stage? I'm sure we have touched upon that as we have talked through. A general walkthrough of that workflow or what it really looks like in practice would really help.
Sure. So when you're planning an intervention, I mean, just referencing back to what the platform is and what it would be used in, we already are at a place, then we've looked at the animal testing and all, and now we want to start looking at trials in humans. So first it is, phase one will be limited number of humans, volunteers, and these are like 50, and we are looking at what the drug does to the body and what the body does to the drug. So we are looking at
Okay.
safety, we are looking at the optimal, we are looking at the maximum tolerable dose, we are looking at how the body is, ingesting the drug and then removing the drug from the system. So that would be phase one. And then when we are confident about, what the safety looks like, what the tolerance of the body looks like, we go into actual patients. But now these are limited in phase two, like 100 to 300, depending upon, the prevalence incidence of the disease. And we are looking at patients to see what is actual optimized dose for the specific cohorts, sub cohorts, or subpopulations. That's what we are looking at. And when we see that optimization for specific subpopulations, we start moving to phase three, where we start introducing more variety, because till now we were looking at a very homogeneous population. Now we are looking at a more heterogeneous population, where we are looking at, populations that we'll have to account for more confounders, for more co-medications, for more co-indications. We have so much comorbidities, we have so much more going on, and that is phase three. And all this is still happening till we have the regulators saying that, okay, now you have market authorization, you will be able to launch the drug in my geography, and that will go country by country, region by region. That's what will happen. So we are still looking at, the safety, the efficacy, the adverse events. Now once the drug is in the real market, it's real world, it's out of the hands of that controlled environment that pharma companies, tech medic devices companies, whoever, the interventions they have produced, it's out of their hands. It's in the real world being prescribed to real patients by real HCPs. Now in this case we have to start looking at what are the adverse events that we see in the real world, and what are the long term effects, because now the RCTs are really, they are only for a short period of time. It depends on the time we have, it is the money we have to invest in it. So besides the fact that we look at the long term consequences, we also start looking at what is really happening with the market acceptance. We are looking at, is it really prescribed the way it was or not, and who is going to pay the money for it. We have the reimbursement, the payers, they decide which tier your drug falls into. If it's a reimbursed market, if it's an out of pocket market, what is the willingness to pay for an intervention? Does a geography, there's this whole aspect of patent laws protect the innovation, and how does it reward the innovation? On its list of priorities, what exactly is the intent to invest or reimburse a particular treatment or intervention? And with that, now the whole conversation shift from, yes, we know this is efficacious, it has a certain amount of adverse effects, to we are in the real world, is it effective? So the efficacy effectiveness gap in the real world, how safe it is, how many incidents do we see, and then we start saying that, okay, was it reimbursed or not? And we start looking at not just complete blanket reimbursement. We also start looking at value, decisions where you're looking at, whether we do a discount or a rebate, value-based payment systems. It goes beyond the tiers that we go for reimbursements. So you start looking at the economic aspects. You start looking at the entire socio-economic breakup of the cohorts, and where you can target or not, which is where the whole targeting commercialization teams come in. How much of it will be the marketing aspect for the evidence? What will be the aspect that you communicate to HCPs? What noise will you create for the patient acceptance? And then you have the patient groups nowadays getting involved, where a treatment might be really beyond the reach of a very specific target cohort, and it's so expensive or not available in their country. How do they get access to it? So the evidence will depend on who needs it, and that is how the evidence generation will go through it. So phase 1, 2, 3, you're looking more at the efficacy, safety, and the adverse events, and then you start looking at the effectiveness in the real world and long term side effects, and whoever wants to or does pay for it and how they prescribe it. So that would be it.
Got it. I mean, that makes for a very comprehensive step-by-step worldview. I think just to get a general sense of the depth of this workflow, what is the typical timelines at every phase that we look at? Because I'm sure this is not happening in a day by far. So, what is the
See, that,
typical
that,
timeline?
that is where everyone starts talking about AI a lot and shortening the timelines. We are looking at some 10 to 20 years for
Wow.
development. The patent is only for 20 years. So the moment
Mhm.
you file the NDA, you are now looking at a patent life. And in that, you have to go from phase 1 to 3, launch the drug, and then you have to start monitoring. So the years in hand you have for development of, conducting all the trials, taking it to market, and getting that first to market thing, and getting your ROI on development, and the opportunity cost of developing the drug, it's very limited. So we are going anywhere from 10 to 20 years, and then reducing the timeline with AI, at least on the data gathering, capturing the, optimizing the analytics, doing your synthetic arms, doing your parallel arms, all those kind of things. So you're reducing from years to months to weeks. That is the timeline we are looking at when we, think about all these studies.
Okay. That puts a lot of things in perspective. I mean, to be very honest, there have been conversations that I've been involved in where when it comes to drug discovery life cycle, people had quoted timelines of 18 months, 22 months, 24 months. And when I, as a builder, was very new in the field, and this is a year back, things used to feel very I mean, I couldn't quite fathom where all of this time was going through, because in the world of software, the timelines are very different, and we are never quite accustomed to hearing things on this order of magnitude of timeline. And the appreciation for what each of these phases and steps are have just continued to grow. So thanks for putting that out.
What happens is you're looking at natural history of disease. A disease happens, you're in a health state, whatever state of health you're in, you get an exposure. Because
Hmm.
of that exposure, you start getting sick. and there are different stages of sickness. Now, what the drugs or interventions are doing it, where in that timeline of the natural history of the disease you can put your intervention and how many years you can save or not. So if the natural history of the disease is longer, then obviously the study will run longer because you want to know where you can intercept it and make that disease, manage it better or stop the disease or treat the disease. But if it is something like pancreatic cancer, obviously your study can't go beyond 6 months. So if it's diabetes, it's a lifelong study, the Framingham Heart study. So it depends on the disease, the natural history of the disease, and your intervention, what the timeline for the clinical trial looks at. Because when we can look at while we can look at simulations, and then we can run multiple simulations for patients and these synthetic arms and the trials that we create in the real world, ultimately you do need to see how the drug works on the patient. So that is where the maximum time goes. So we always have to put that in perspective, that the actual clinical trial time will be there, but then we can optimize the rest of the time where we are like running around to look at the data, hypothesizing, analyzing, all of those things.
Makes sense. Makes sense. I think one question that I've typically always had, and I've always wanted to gain perspectives from operators, is that what does good evidence look like in your worldview? So as we go through the phases, there are always studies done. There is always some field research that we are doing. There is some we are getting from the data. There is some amount of I would say market dynamics that are coming into play. What in your worldview does good evidence look like? And I'm sure that there would have been certain instances, right, where you would have formed a hypothesis based on whatever was out there till that moment of time. And then there were some new elements that had come in, whether that be from just like patient interactions all the way to certain other elements coming to the picture. How often does it change for you personally?
So, objectively speaking, evidence has its own tiers, right? You have your systematic literature reviews and meta-analysis coming from
Yeah,
RCTs, randomized control. They are the top tier because you have these
yeah,
very controlled environments and it's a meta-analysis of that. So that's top tier RCTs because you have almost controlled all the factors. And then you have, simulated you have provided your intervention, captured your outcomes and all. But then you start looking at real world data for evidence and you start mimicking what would happen in those controlled environments where you start mapping the variables and the outcomes and how you capture them and then how you compare it to actual randomized cohort. All that said and done, what also happens is, what would be really low tier would be a cross-sectional study. Now, you can do a cross-sectional study to get an
okay,
idea of what's there, but then you're not really looking at good data on that particular day, on that particular, data capture site. Whatever you did was done, and then you can't take it as evidence to regulators or reimburse payers that, this is what should happen. Also, then once you have ensured what kind of evidence you have generated hierarchically, scientifically, what you have to look at, who's looking at the evidence. That is
yeah,
most important. It's just the stakeholders. Like when you go to HCPs want to treat their patients. They don't care about your innovation. They don't care how, I mean, it's not that they don't care, but what they want to see is an impact on the patient outcome. They want to see the patient improve, be saved, do not to have as much morbidity or, the time to treatment, the time to patient management, all that has to reduce. They have to get better. The payer, though, does not look at it that way. So the evidence that the payer wants to look at is, if I am investing so much money in this patient, from which patient I am taking away that money? And if I do, then what is the impact on the rest of the patients? So if I can give a vaccine, which comes, obviously a vaccine is a preventable thing. So it comes much earlier in your treatment pathway, in the natural history of the disease. So you stop the disease from happening. And that's why it's cheaper technically to treat it there instead of letting the healthy individuals get infected, and then you start treating for like pneumonia and acute respiratory tract infections and all that. So obviously you're looking at that payoff. So reimbursement bodies, they are looking at very different metrics. You're looking, if you go to talk to hospitals, hospital chains, what they are looking at is, we have this whole network and we are going to have all our hospitals prescribe this particular drug or intervention, and we can have a rebate or a discount on this. Then when I'm putting it onto my list, then how many patients can I accommodate for, and who will pay for it? How many of these will be on claims? How many of these will be out of pocket? In my catchment area, how many possible patients will be there? So, these commercial analytics folks, their idea of evidence and their need for evidence is very different from HCP's need for evidence or a RWHUR person's need of evidence. So, evidence, there's the scientific aspect to evidence generation, and then there is the stakeholder aspect of evidence, and we have to have both those factors accounted for when we are looking at evidence generation.
Makes sense. I mean, to be honest, when you describe the stakeholder aspect is when it starts relating with the kind of experiences that we have also heard from the commercial analytics teams typically, or in certain cases the platform analytics teams as well, where there are certain definitions that are going around, there are certain lens with which they want to look at, there are obviously certain incentive mechanisms for different people to look at things a certain way, and all of that starts sort of playing in the way the definitions are being looked at, captured, or the lens with which it is sort of analyzed. So that actually puts a lot of
I
sense
mean,
to
you look
this.
at this. You ask for an
Yeah.
example. You look at this in a manner that when we look at something like Ozempic,
Hmm.
it was launched a while back. This is not it became a craze now, but it wasn't a
Yeah.
craze back then when it was launched. For the indications, it was. So, but what happened is the social media has primed certain sections of the society in certain geographies to chase after a particular body type. There are even sports stars like Serena Williams who are absolutely healthy, peak athletes, who are telling people that go on and just for losing weight. So that is a very visual society. And you are primed for launch in a society that is looking at just being thin, and that's why you want to have Ozempic. You have a barrage of influencers telling people that, take this and you will be the ideal body type because this is societally accepted. This is the definition of pretty. And then, in the east and in the west, that is the ideal of beauty. And the society is so primed to launch a drug like this that it gets accepted. And that is what everyone thought would happen in India in a population of 1.3 billion, 4 billion. And although we keep saying things like, we have so many obese, this, that, and all that, and people want to lose weight. Yes, many people want to lose weight for medical reasons and for aesthetic purposes. You have, all kinds of visual incentives being trying to be pushed on the Indian population. But actual people, when they started taking Ozempic in India, they did not respond the way the rest of the world did. I have people in my friend circle, acquaintanceship circle, who started on Ozempic because they were like, oh, this is going to be thin and I'm going to be like all that. And then they took Ozempic. They did not like the side effects. So the willingness and the acceptance to bear the side effects of Ozempic is not a GLP-1. I've repeated that term too many times, GLP-1s. They do not see it the same way that I don't want my thinness in lieu of my mental health. Like I'm always tired. I'm losing body mass. I'm losing bone mass. I'm nauseous. I'm shitting. But it doesn't work for them. It works for certain geographies. So now what happens is you have the scientific evidence which is there from RCTs and real world, and they have listed down whatever is there. So HCPs can communicate to you. But at the end of the day, you have to see what the social acceptance of a drug is, what the trade off for that particular outcome is for the patients. And then you have to adjust your philosophy and your marketing, your commercialization in that way. So all those factors really change. No one would think, GLP-1s wouldn't be able to make their numbers in India, but the industry was hit very hard. So you have to always have that feedback loop and mechanism where it goes, it's not just going to work because it worked in one place. You have to do your due diligence wherever you are.
Makes sense. I mean, reminded me of this discussion we had before this, where you tend to see what you understand, and
Mm.
your understanding can stem from a different, like multiple places. So there is always the scientific evidence element to it, might be reflected in some form of data. There'll be some continuous angles that will be coming in, and there'll be some market context, be it social, epistemological, or if there are certain factors that are coming in from competitors or the market at large. And all of
I mean,
that needs to be
look at
accounted for.
LLMs. Okay, now you pulled your
Yeah.
LLMs from the public domain and you fine-tuned them. But what
Yeah.
happens is, because this is, you say, a lot of this population, like what a lot of the attendees here are coming from data background, not core healthcare background. So classic examples and mistakes, as you say, anecdotes of what happened. So we were
Yeah.
developing at this point of time in one of the companies, we developed a agent that would like extract data from for a particular target disease, and then it would give us the numbers, it would create the protocol, the statistical analytical plan, and all that. Going very well. It's gone into testing. Now what happens is I come on board and I say, coming from a client perspective, I'm just sitting there and it doesn't matter. I'm at the fag end of the regulators and the commercialization. And I say, tell me what will be the numbers in North America and how do we do it? Now, all the material that they have for fine tuning the LLM, none of it says North America. It says America, USA, it says Canada. It does not say North America. So what the LLM does is, in my view, in my chibi anime version, see the LLM going all over the place and it doesn't know what to do. It goes to the open source, it pulls out files for North America, high prevalence, and it gives us trees.
Okay.
For trees in North America instead of multiple sclerosis rates because it says North America high prevalence. That is how bad LLMs can crash even if you fine tune them. So, just putting that domain aspect and training and putting context is so important. And you need someone to be there to see the human in the loop, to see what's going on, and then go on from there. So there are small things that you have to kind of input and train it for that can completely crash the system if you don't take care of it.
I mean, thanks a lot for sharing that, Doctor. I mean, we have heard different versions of this story. This one will be pretty much in the top three or top five of those of what the LLM can end up doing. Typically, that is why like our worldview exists here around domain ontology, being able to plug that in and giving you a place to review it, add your expertise to it. Because without that, the LLMs can just go haywire. Forget about the token cost and all of that aspects. But yes, I mean, with this, I think we have already shot a little about time. But thanks a lot, Dr. Kavita. I think this was very enriching, not just for the audience, but for me personally as well. I think the anecdotes do hit different than they leave a lasting impression. I think. Like learned a lot and would love to keep showing you as the platform also evolves. I hope that what you saw here today was more in line with how you would actually expect your real world systems to work and to sort of obey the laws as it should.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and keep the feedback loops going. It's really nice. I like what I see, want to be involved as always, and hopefully the audience got to, at least have a good time hearing whatever we said.
yeah, sure. So thanks a lot, Dr. Kavita. And
Pleasure.
thanks a lot, people, for joining in. Yeah.